when a member of Congress dares to ask, "What's going on with the Epstein files?" and the room goes silent, you know something big is being hidden. The kind of silence that doesn't come from ignorance, but fear. Because this time, that question wasn't asked by a fringe voice. It came from Congressman Dan Goldman, right in the middle of a hearing meant to hold the government accountable. And what followed was one of the most uncomfortable exchanges Washington has seen all year. Goldman wasn't talking about partisanship or political theater. He was demanding answers about the very thing every American has quietly wondered: why the Epstein files, the ones that were promised to be made public, are still locked away.
That authorizes both Republicans and Democrats to conduct oversight over facilities that house or detain immigrants. But no, the department refuses. So we're here in the Homeland Security Committee, and I'm sure the Republican majority does not like it when this administration undermines its own authority, its own statutory authority, to conduct oversight. But no, instead of all of that, we are here talking yet again about Joe Biden. Newsflash, Joe Biden is not the president. He hasn't been the president for 7 months. So if we are going to conduct oversight here, why are we doing it about the Biden administration when this administration is literally detaining lawful permanent residents and even some U.S. citizens? And it gets worse. It's not just those masked ICE agents. There are many FBI agents who are being called away from their duties to investigate terrorism, violent gangs, child trafficking, and other crimes in order to help ICE arrest and detain immigrants with legal asylum claims, nonviolent. That makes our homeland less safe, not more safe. So we should hear from FBI Director Kash Patel about how many of his criminal investigators are being taken away from their criminal investigatory jobs, keeping Americans safe in order to help round up non-criminal immigrants trying to immigrate the right way. Some of these detainees are being held in Bureau of Prisons detention centers that are unfit for convicted criminals to stay in. We should hear from Pam Bondi about how much of the department's resources are being used to detain these nonviolent, non-criminal immigration detainees. And while they're here, we can ask them about a very pressing question. What's going on with the Epstein files? Donald Trump promised to release them. Pam Bondi said she had the files on her desk and that she was going to release them in the name of transparency. Kash Patel has spent years railing against the FBI to release the files. Many of my Republican colleagues were banging on the table to release the Epstein files. But now, all of a sudden, after a months-long review, Bondi and Patel say nothing to see here, no evidence that any American would want to see about accomplices, co-conspirators, or other people involved. Yesterday, the Republicans voted against releasing the files. So what's changed? Well, we all know Donald Trump has had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He flew on his plane, he hung out in parties, spoke highly of him. And now there are many people saying that Donald Trump is included in the Epstein files. In fact, there are reporters who say that there are videos of him with topless women. Elon Musk even confirmed that Trump is blocking the release of these files because he's in them. Pam Bondi says there's nothing there, but Donald Trump even acknowledges that there is evidence there. It's just not credible. It's made up. This is a Truth Social post from 9:43 this morning. It is an admission that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, and the American people deserve to know whether he is or not.
Mr. Garbarino,
Mr. Chairman, I would, pursuant to Clause 2K6 of Rule 11.
Gentleman is not recognized. Your time has expired.
I have a motion,
Mr. Garbarino,
Mr. Chairman.
recognized for questioning.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman has a motion.
Pursuant to Clause 2K6 of Rule 11, I move that the committee subpoena Pam Bondi, Attorney General of the United States, and Kash Patel, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mr. Chairman, motion table.
Gentleman has a motion.
Motion to table.
Motion to table is privileged and non-debatable.
And the name at the center of it all, Pam Bondi, the same person who once stood before cameras, vowing transparency, saying she had those files on her desk, ready to release them to the public. But months later, nothing. No documents. No updates. No explanations. Just silence. That silence is what Goldman called out. Because it isn't just about one set of files. It's about trust, power, and who decides what the American people get to know. Bondi's department has spent months stonewalling congressional oversight. Subpoenas ignored. Requests denied. Statements delayed. And when Goldman dropped his own subpoena on the record, he wasn't just pushing for paperwork. He was forcing a moment of reckoning that he began by calling out how law enforcement resources have been twisted, reshaped, and used for political convenience. Agents who once chased criminals and terrorists are now chasing immigrants with clean records. Investigators who used to track violent offenders are being reassigned to handle administrative detentions. It's not just inefficient, it's dangerous. Goldman warned that when you pull resources away from crime prevention to serve political optics, you don't make the country safer. You make it weaker. But then, in a single pivot, he brought up something far more explosive. The Epstein files. Files that could expose names, connections, and cover-ups that stretch across the highest levels of power. For years, public figures promised to release them. For years, the public has waited. And for years, excuses have piled up like a barricade of bureaucracy. Bondi said transparency was her mission. She claimed the files were already in her possession. But when it came time to act, her office went dark. No release, no press conference, no accountability. Goldman's frustration was palpable. You could hear it in his tone. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about a system that hides behind procedure while Americans lose faith in the truth itself. He reminded the committee that even after Bondi's claims, not one verified document has surfaced. And that's not just an oversight. It's a choice. Someone is deciding that the public doesn't need to know. What makes this even more suspicious is who has gone quiet. Bondi isn't the only one who promised action and then vanished from the conversation. Kash Patel, the man who once railed against the FBI for withholding Epstein's materials, now says, nothing to see here. Both of them once demanded full transparency. Now, after a mysterious, months-long review, they claim there's no new evidence worth releasing. The question is, what changed? Behind closed doors, insiders whisper about national security concerns, legal sensitivities, and ongoing investigations. Convenient phrases that tend to mean the same thing, delay and deflect. But those delays have consequences. Each day the files stay sealed, the public's trust in the system erodes a little more. Because people remember the promises. They remember that these weren't just documents. They were supposed to be proof of who was involved, who protected Epstein, and how deep the connections really went. And here's the irony. Those same voices who once screamed for openness are now the ones hiding behind closed doors. They demanded the files be released under previous administrations, claiming it was about justice and truth. But the moment political risk entered the picture, those same champions of transparency suddenly found new excuses. Bondi said she would release everything in the name of justice. Patel promised to let the American people decide. And yet, when the spotlight turned toward them, they blinked. Goldman wasn't just angry. He was exposing a pattern, a government that has started to treat the truth as optional, agencies that move the goalposts whenever questions get too uncomfortable. He connected the Epstein files to something even broader, a trend of power being used to protect itself instead of the people it serves. He talked about ICE agents operating with no oversight, FBI divisions being redirected to serve political goals, and Congress being blocked from visiting detention centers it's legally authorized to inspect. Every example painted the same picture. Institutions being bent by political will. And when those same institutions control access to the Epstein documents, you start to see why transparency has become such a threat. Because the truth inside those files isn't just about one man's crimes. It's about a network, a system, the people who looked away, who funded, who benefited. It's about connections that span industries, governments, and influence. And it's about how power can buy silence. Even in death. Goldman's words hit harder when you remember his background. This isn't a man who throws around accusations lightly. As a former federal prosecutor, he knows what evidence looks like. He knows what's buried in redacted pages. And he knows how easy it is for an investigation to disappear when the right people say the right words at the right time. His subpoena wasn't political theater. It was a challenge to a wall that has stood for years. He demanded Bondi's office hand over all documents related to the Epstein investigation, communications regarding their delay, and internal memos explaining why release promises were never fulfilled. He made it clear that this wasn't about politics. It was about public trust. If an administration promises transparency and then hides the truth, that's not governance. That's deception. But the pushback was immediate. Members of the committee tried to change the subject, to redirect attention toward immigration, toward unrelated hearings, anything to avoid the uncomfortable question, where are the files? One member even attempted to cut Goldman off mid-sentence. Another claimed it was old news. But the more they tried to silence him, the louder the moment became. Because when politicians start avoiding the question, the public starts asking it louder. Goldman didn't let up. He pointed out the contradiction. Just months ago, Republicans were pounding their desks demanding those very files be released. They accused opponents of hiding names and shielding elites. Now, those same lawmakers voted against the release. Every promise of transparency turned into obstruction the moment accountability came knocking. And that's when he revealed something that caught everyone's attention, a statement made just hours before the hearing. A social post acknowledging that there is evidence in the files, but dismissing it as made up. Goldman called it what it was, an admission that the files contain references to powerful figures, even if they claim those references aren't credible. The simple fact that they exist means they should be made public. Because credibility can't be judged behind closed doors. When powerful officials decide what the public can or can't see, it's no longer democracy, it's control. And that's what Goldman was warning against. He wasn't just demanding documents. He was defending the principle of accountability itself. As the hearing went on, the tension in the room thickened. Goldman's remarks turned from frustration to something deeper, disappointment. You could hear it when he said the American people deserve to know the truth. He wasn't just speaking as a lawmaker. He was speaking as a citizen tired of watching justice get filtered through politics. He described how FBI agents, some of the nation's best investigators, are being pulled from critical assignments to chase immigration cases that don't threaten national safety. He connected that to Bondi's misallocation of resources. The same department that claims it's too overburdened to release Epstein files somehow has time to detain nonviolent asylum seekers. The contrast was deliberate. When priorities shift away from justice toward image management, the truth becomes collateral damage. Goldman's statement might have sounded like just another committee speech, but in reality, it was a warning. Because if the subpoena he issued succeeds, it won't just expose what's inside the Epstein files. It could reveal the full machinery of how truth is managed, delayed, and denied. And it raises an even bigger question. How much power do our leaders have to decide what we're allowed to know? If a promise of transparency can vanish without consequence, then every public assurance means nothing. Every vow to let the truth come out becomes just another soundbite. That's why this moment matters. It's not about one file or one name. It's about the system that decides which truths survive and which get buried. Goldman's frustration captured something many Americans feel, that institutions built to serve the people have started serving themselves. The Epstein case is just the most visible example of that decay. For years, those files have been treated like radioactive material, too dangerous to release, too controversial to destroy, and too revealing to ignore. But the more they're hidden, the more powerful they become. They've turned into a symbol, not just of one man's crimes, but of a government's unwillingness to face its own reflection. Bondi once said, "We owe the public the full truth." Today, her silence says the opposite. Kash Patel once promised that no name would be spared. Today, he insists there's nothing to release. The turnaround is too clean, too calculated, too convenient to be coincidence. And that's what keeps people watching, not just because of what's been said, but because of what hasn't. Every unanswered question adds another layer to the mystery. Every denial adds another reason to doubt. The Epstein files are no longer just evidence. They're a mirror, reflecting the fear of what transparency might uncover. That Goldman's subpoena may or may not break through that wall, but it's a reminder that some people in Washington still believe the public deserves the truth. He wasn't asking for political advantage. He was demanding accountability. And that's exactly what this story is about. Not who wins the argument, but whether truth still matters. Because in the end, this fight isn't just about files, names, or offices. It's about whether justice in America still serves the people or whether it now serves power. And that question is far bigger than anyone hearing. It's a question every citizen should be asking. Who decides what we're allowed to know? If you believe that truth should never be locked away, that the public deserves answers no matter how uncomfortable they are, then this story isn't one to ignore. Because the more light that shines on it, the harder it becomes for anyone to hide in the dark. This investigation isn't over. The subpoenas are flying, the pressure is building, and the silence from those in power is getting louder by the day. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is being hidden, and why? Your voice matters more than ever, because the truth doesn't survive in silence.